Hello, welcome to this video on respiratory and cardiovascular system. I am Karen Davila and I am a second-year dental therapy and hygiene student. Understanding human physiology is essential for studying and practicing dentistry. Not only do we need to spot oral disease, but we must also recognize signs of systemic illnesses in a patient, so that we can refer them to our medical colleagues for a correct care. Understanding the cardiovascular and respiratory system in particular is vital for the management of medical emergency that you may come across in the dental practice. So you will be covering many aspects of normal human physiology in your first year at dental school. And you will go on to study diseases of the systems later on. Before you start, it is important that you are comfortable with the basics of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. So you should be able to explain the structure and function of the cardiovascular system, the flow of blood through the heart and around the body, the structure and function of the respiratory system, and the process of respiration and disease of the lung function. The role of the respiratory system is to deliver air to the lungs so that the oxygen can be taken up and waste carbon dioxide can be removed. Air enters the respiratory system through the nose and mouth, travels backwards this connective tube, the pharynx, before making its way into the trachea. This tube behind the trachea is the esophagus. When we eat, the trachea is closed off by the structure known as the epiglottis. Have you ever experienced food going to the wrong way and you have sort of coughing fit? Well, that is what happens when the epiglottis does not close off of the trachea properly, and the food that was meant to go down your esophagus gets into the airway. The trachea divides into two branches, the bronchi, to provide airway to the lungs. The right lung has 3 lobes, the right, whilst the left lung has only 2 lobes. You can see that the heart is positioned towards the left side of the body, which takes up the space from the lungs so that it only has room for 2 lobes rather than 3. The bronchi branch off into smaller airways, the bronchioles, to get air into the alveoli where gas exchange occurs. There are thousands of those alveoli, which provides massive surface area for gas exchange. In fact, if laid down flat, adults have 75 square meters of alveoli. The alveoli are 1 cell layer thick. Lying deep in those alveolar cells are thin blood vessels called capillaries, which are also 1 cell in thickness. This means that there are very skinny layers of cells separating the air in the alveoli and the blood in the blood vessels, making it easy for the gas to diffuse through. Gases follow a concentration gradient, meaning that oxygen will diffuse into the oxygenated blood. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported around the body by red blood cells attached to the molecule called hemoglobin. The lungs are surrounded by 2 protective sacs. One of them is the visceral pleura, which is attached to the lungs, and the other one is the parietal pleura, which is attached to the chest wall. In between those 2 pleuras, there is a thin layer of fluid, which stops the lung from rubbing against inside the chest cavity and helps to keep the lung inflated by creating a surface tension between the visceral and parietal pleura. Lungs are very elastic, and to stay inflated, they must have air inside the alveoli. If the pressure of the air inside the lungs become lower than the pressure outside the lungs, For example, if the chest wall and parietal pleura are damaged by a stab wound, and air is allowed into the pleural cavity, the lungs will be deflated. So this is known as pneumothorax. As we breathe in, the muscles of inhalation contract, expanding the thoracic cavity, and the lungs inflate. This is a good idea to become familiar with the muscles of respiration, as you will build on in year 1. As the lungs expand, the alveoli become larger, and so the pressure in the alveoli becomes lower than the pressure in the atmosphere. Pressure will always try to balance out. So in this way, air is sucked into the lungs until the alveolar pressure is equal to the atmosphere pressure. The amount of air taken into the lungs in a normal breath is known as the tidal volume. In healthy adults, this is typically around 500 milliliters, but the lungs can hold more than a tidal volume. Because if we breathe out all the air in our lungs, they would deflate. If you breathe as much air as you possibly can, there will always be a little bit left in the alveoli. This volume is known as the residual volume. Other useful measures of the lungs' functions are vital capacity, which are the volume of air you can breathe out following the biggest inhalation you can manage, and total capacity, which is the total volume of air your lungs can hold, which is the vital capacity plus the residual capacity. Those measures of lung function can be given important information for managing respiratory disease such as asthma. The primary role of the cardiovascular system is to transport blood around the body. Blood supplies nutrients and oxygen into our cells and carries waste products away. It operates as a closed-circuit system, much like a central heating at home, with a network of pipes, in this case are the blood vessels, and a pump at the center, which in this case is the heart. The heart is made up of 4 chambers. The upper part, there are 2 atria, the left and the right, which collect blood from the veins. The atria are separated from those 2 lower chambers, the ventricles, by valves. The valves are important because they stop any blood flowing backwards into the atria when the ventricles contract. This is called as regurgitation. It is the job of the ventricles to eject the blood from the heart into the blood vessels network. You can see that the atria walls are much thinner than the ventricular walls. And this is because the ventricles have to pump the blood with more force than the atria, which only have to push the blood down into the ventricles. You will also see that the left ventricle has a thicker wall than the right. And this is because the left ventricle has to pump blood into the systemic circulation. Systemic means the whole body, whereas the right ventricle needs to pump blood into the pulmonary circulation. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood towards the heart. Arteries and veins are joined together by capillaries, which perfuse every tissue in our bodies. After circulating around the body, the oxygenated blood arrives at the right atrium through the superior and inferior vena cava. After passing through the right ventricle, it enters the pulmonary artery and it carries towards the lung, where gas exchange between the capillaries and alveoli can occur. Oxygenated blood is then taken back to the heart via the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary circulation is the only place where veins carry oxygenated blood and arteries carry the oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood then enters the left atrium, then the left ventricle, then is pumped out into the systemic circulation via the aorta. Arteries carry blood at high pressure when it's just been forcefully ejected from the ventricles. Those blood vessels need to be elastic so that they don't burst when they receive bolus of blood following each heartbeat. In veins, blood pressure is low because they are further away from the heart and have a large diameter, which means that they need valves to stop blood from flowing backwards. Because they have a large diameter, the veins can hold a lot more blood than the arteries. So we suddenly find that we need to raise our blood pressure, such as in fight and flight response. Our veins, which are surrounded by a layer of smooth muscle, will become narrower, thus increasing the blood pressure in our blood. On the other hand, if the diameter of the veins is too large and your brain detects that it is not receiving enough blood, it will cause you to faint, so that you fall to the ground and the blood no longer has to work uphill. Blood pressure is detected by structures called baroreceptors. Baro means pressure, and receptors receive messages, and is controlled by widening and narrowing of the blood vessels. The narrower the blood vessels, the higher the pressure, and vice versa. Major baroreceptors are located in the aorta and the carotid sinus. They can send messages to the brain that the blood pressure is too high or too low, and the brain will structure the nervous system to contract the blood vessels. This is called vasoconstriction, or to relax the blood vessels. This is called vasodilation. I hope you have enjoyed the video on the respiratory and cardiovascular systems. Now please go to Moodle pages and complete the Physiology 1 quiz. There is extra material on the page. We will help you to understand the concept we have covered today. So please read them. If you have any question, please ask in the forum and we will be very happy to answer. Thank you for listening and see you in the next video. Oxygenated blood then enters the left atrium, then the left ventricle, then is pumped into the I think we scratched I should have taken your offer on a coffee, you know.